The moving truck finally pulled away, and the couple stood in front of their new home, taking it all in. It was a charming little house with a neat lawn, white picket fence, and flower beds that looked like they hadn't been touched in months. The wife smiled at her husband, feeling a mix of excitement and nervousness. This was their fresh start, a place where they could build memories, grow roots, and maybe even put down some literal roots by fixing up those sad-looking flower beds. Had heard good things about the neighborhood before buying the house. People said it was peaceful, friendly, and full of families who cared about keeping everything tidy. But what they didn't know yet was that behind the perfectly trimmed hedges and shiny mailboxes lurked a world of rules, pettiness, and one particularly overzealous neighbor. It didn't take long for them to meet her. Just 2 days after moving in, there was a knock on the door. When the wife opened it, she saw a woman standing there, holding a clipboard like it was a weapon. Her sunglasses were pushed up onto her head, and her lips were curled into a tight smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She introduced herself as the head of the Homeowners Association and wasted no time getting straight to the point. "So, welcome to the neighborhood," she chirped, though her tone suggested anything but warmth. "I'm sure you've already noticed how lovely and well-maintained everything is around here. That's because we have certain standards." She tapped her pen against the clipboard. "For emphasis. Everyone participates in the HOA. It's what keeps this place running smoothly." The wife blinked, caught off guard by the sudden sales pitch. She glanced at her husband, who gave her an encouraging nod, signaling it was okay to handle this. Turning back to the visitor, she politely explained that they weren't interested in joining any formal associations right now. They were still settling in, figuring out their routine, and honestly, paying dues to an HOA wasn't high on their priority list. The woman's smile faltered, and for a moment she looked genuinely shocked. Then, just as quickly, her expression hardened. "Oh," she said, her voice colder now. "Well, let me tell you something. This isn't just some random subdivision, it's a community. And if you don't participate, you're not really part of it." Her words hung in the air like a warning. Before leaving, she turned back and added, almost casually, "We'll see how long you last." Once the door closed, the husband burst out laughing. "Wow, intense much?" he joked, shaking his head. But the wife wasn't laughing. There was something unsettling about the way the woman had spoken, like she wasn't just making idle threats. Something told her this wasn't going to be the last time they'd hear from her. Over the next few days, life seemed normal enough. Boxes were unpacked, furniture arranged, and grocery trips made. But small signs began to creep in, hinting that their neighbor wasn't done with them. One morning, they found their trash cans tipped over, spilling garbage across the driveway. Another day, flyers advertising upcoming HOA meetings appeared taped to their front door. At first, they brushed it off as coincidence or maybe kids playing pranks. But when the same woman started parking her car directly in front of their driveway every evening, blocking their exit, it became clear this wasn't random. One evening, as they sat on the porch sipping coffee, the husband spotted the woman walking down the street with 2 other neighbors. They stopped in front of the house and stared pointedly at the mailbox. The wife followed their gaze and sighed. Their mailbox, a simple wooden one they'd picked up at a garage sale, didn't match the sleek uniform designs everyone else had. Seriously? The husband muttered under his breath. What's next? A dress code for lawns? The wife shrugged, trying to stay calm. Let them have their little power trip, she said, though deep down she couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. What neither the nosy neighbor nor anyone else in the area realized was that the wife wasn't just another homeowner trying to blend in. She had a unique position, one that might change the game entirely. But for now, she kept quiet, biding her time and waiting to see how far things would escalate. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Casting long shadows across the street, the couple retreated inside, shutting the door firmly behind them. Little did they know, the real drama was only just getting started. The tension between the couple and their overzealous neighbor continued to simmer in the weeks that followed. At first, it was just little things, petty annoyances that could almost be dismissed as coincidences if they weren't so frequent. Their trash cans would mysteriously end up overturned on garbage day, spilling empty soda cans and crumpled wrappers across the driveway. Flyers advertising HOA meetings kept appearing taped to their front door, no matter how many times they threw them away. And then there was the parking issue. Every evening, without fail, the woman who had introduced herself as the head of the HOA would park her car directly in front of their driveway, making it nearly impossible to back out. At first, the husband tried to laugh it off. What is she going to do next? He joked one morning as he lugged the tipped-over trash cans back to the curb. Paint our house pink while we're asleep? But the wife wasn't laughing anymore. She knew this wasn't just playful teasing or harmless pranks, it was a power play. The woman was sending a message loud and clear: conform or face the consequences. One sunny Saturday afternoon, the couple was relaxing in their backyard when they heard voices coming from the street. Curious, they peeked through the fence and saw the woman leading a small group of neighbors down the sidewalk. They stopped right in front of the house and stood staring at the mailbox. It was an old wooden box with peeling paint, nothing fancy but perfectly functional. Still, it clearly didn't meet whatever invisible standards the HOA had set for the neighborhood. Unbelievable. The wife muttered under her breath. She turned to her husband and raised an eyebrow. Do you think she's recruiting backup? Now? He shrugged, trying to stay calm. Maybe they're starting a fan club for ugly mailboxes. But the wife wasn't amused. As much as she wanted to brush it off, she couldn't ignore the growing sense of unease. Something about the way the woman carried herself made it obvious she wasn't going to back down anytime soon. This wasn't just about aesthetics or rules, it was personal. And what worried her most was that she had no idea where it might lead. A few days later, the situation escalated in a way neither of them expected. The wife came home from work late one evening to find a large sign planted in their front yard. It read, ***, non-compliant property violation notice. ***. Her jaw dropped as she stared at it, half amused and half outraged. Who did these people think they were? She marched inside, grabbed a shovel, and yanked the sign out of the ground before tossing it into the garage with a huff. Her husband walked in just as she slammed the garage door shut. What happened? He asked, noticing the stormy look on her face. She pointed toward the garage. Take a wild guess. He peeked inside and burst out laughing when he saw the sign. Wow, they really mean business, huh? They can try all they want, she said firmly, crossing her arms. I'm not letting some self-appointed queen of the block dictate how I live my life. Despite her confidence, though, the incident left her rattled. What started as minor annoyances was starting to feel like harassment. The constant scrutiny, the passive-aggressive comments, the blatant attempts to intimidate, it was exhausting. But what neither the nosy neighbor nor anyone else realized was that the wife wasn't just any ordinary homeowner. She had resources, authority, and experience dealing with people who thought they were above the law. And sooner or later, she knew she'd have to use them. Meanwhile, the woman behind all the drama was getting increasingly frustrated. No matter what she did, the new neighbors refused to budge. They ignored her flyers, cleaned up their trash without complaint, and even removed the violation sign without so much as a word to anyone. To her, it felt like defiance, a direct challenge to her authority. And that was something she couldn't tolerate. One afternoon, she decided to take matters into her own hands. Sitting at her kitchen table, she pulled out her phone and dialed "The local police department." When the dispatcher answered, she launched into a detailed explanation of the code violations at the non-compliant property. "It's completely unacceptable," she insisted, her voice rising with indignation. "These people are ruining the neighborhood. Someone needs to step in and make them follow the rules." To her delight, officers arrived within the hour. 2 patrol cars pulled up in front of the house, lights flashing but sirens silent. The husband was outside tinkering with his car when he spotted them. He straightened up, confused, and waved awkwardly as they approached. Before he could say anything, the front door opened and his wife stepped outside. She was wearing her uniform, the one she only brought out for official duties, and her badge glinted in the sunlight. The officers froze mid-stride, their expression shifting from stern professionalism to mild embarrassment. Ma'am?" One of them began hesitantly, glancing between her and the clipboard in his hand. "We got a call about hey," he trailed off, clearly unsure how to proceed. The wife raised an eyebrow. "Let me guess," she said dryly. "My neighbor called you?" The officers exchanged uncomfortable looks before nodding. One of them cleared his throat. "Look, we understand this is probably a misunderstanding, but protocol says we need to address complaints." She held up a hand, cutting him off. "I get it," she said calmly. "And trust me, I appreciate you guys doing your job. But let's be real here. This isn't exactly a high-priority case." She gestured toward the house. "Tell me, does my mailbox pose a threat to public safety?" The officers chuckled nervously. "Not exactly," one admitted. "Good," she said, folding her arms. "Now, if you don't mind, I'd like to know who filed this complaint." "Officially, of course." The officers glanced at each other again, clearly torn between duty and discretion. Finally, one of them sighed. "We'll handle it discreetly, ma'am. Don't worry." As they walked back to their cars, the husband leaned over and whispered, "Well, that went better than expected." His wife smirked. For them, maybe. For her, not so much. Later that night, as they sat on the couch watching TV, the husband couldn't help but shake his head. "You know," he said, grinning, "most people deal with HOA drama by baking cookies or writing strongly worded letters. You bring out the big guns," she laughed, leaning back against the cushions. "Hey, desperate times call for desperate measures. Besides, if she wants to play games, fine. But she should know by now I don't lose." Her words hung in the air, laced with quiet determination. For now, the battle lines had been drawn. The nosy neighbor had picked a fight with the wrong person, and it was only a matter of time before she realized just how far out of her depth she truly was. The nosy neighbor was fuming. Her plan to get the authorities involved had backfired spectacularly, and she knew it. When the police cars pulled up in front of the house, she peeked through her curtains, confident that justice, or at least her version of it, was about to be served. But when she saw the wife step outside wearing a crisp uniform with a shiny badge pinned to her chest, her jaw nearly hit the floor. For a moment, she stood frozen, gripping the edge of her curtain as reality sank in. The woman she'd been targeting wasn't just some ordinary homeowner trying to dodge HOA rules. She was the sheriff. And not only that, but the officers who showed up clearly respected her authority. Instead of handing out warnings or citations, they left looking embarrassed, like kids caught sneaking cookies from the jar. When the patrol cars drove away, the nosy neighbor retreated to her living room, pacing back and forth. "This isn't over," she muttered under her breath. "She can't just flaunt the rules and expect to get away with it." But deep down, doubt began to creep in. For weeks, she'd been convinced that her persistence would eventually break the new neighbors. Now, for the first time, she wondered if she'd bitten off more than she could chew. Meanwhile, word spread quickly through the neighborhood. Neighbors whispered behind closed doors, sharing details about what had happened. Some were amused by the irony of the situation, a self-appointed enforcer getting schooled by someone with actual authority. Others felt a pang of guilt, realizing how petty and invasive the whole ordeal had become. A few even started questioning whether the HOA's strict rules were really worth all the drama. The husband noticed the shift almost immediately. People who had previously avoided eye contact now waved warmly as they passed by on their morning walks. One neighbor even stopped to chat while walking her dog. "You know," she said casually, "we're glad you're standing your ground. That woman? Well, let's just say she's taken things too far before." He nodded, grateful for the support but careful not to stir the pot further. "Thanks," he replied with a small smile. "We're just trying to live our lives, you know. No harm intended." As the days went by, the atmosphere in the neighborhood began to change. The flyers stopped appearing on their door, the trash cans stayed upright, and the mysterious car blocking their driveway disappeared. It seemed like the nosy neighbor had finally backed off for now, at least. But the wife knew better than to let her guard down completely. She'd dealt with people like this before in her line of work, people who thrived on control and wouldn't give up easily. Sure enough, it didn't take long for the next move to come. One afternoon, a flyer appeared in every mailbox except theirs. It announced an urgent community meeting to discuss neighborhood standards and compliance. The timing was no coincidence. It was clear the nosy neighbor was planning something big. Determined to confront the issue head-on, the wife decided to attend. After all, avoiding conflict hadn't worked so far. Maybe it was time to face it directly. On the evening of the meeting, the couple walked into the community center together. The room buzzed with quiet chatter as neighbors took their seats around a long table. At the front sat the nosy neighbor, flanked by two other residents who looked equally uncomfortable. When the wife entered, wearing her uniform once again, the room fell silent. Every eye turned toward her, and the nosy neighbor's face flushed bright red. "Well," the wife said calmly, breaking the awkward silence, "I hear there are concerns about my family's involvement or lack thereof in this neighborhood." She pulled out a chair and sat down, meeting the nosy neighbor's glare with a steady gaze. "Let's talk about it." The nosy neighbor stammered, clearly thrown off by the unexpected arrival. Yes," she managed, clutching her notes tightly. "We wanted to address some issues regarding property compliance and community participation." The wife leaned forward slightly, her tone polite but firm. "Issues like what, exactly?" "My mailbox? Because last I checked, it holds mail just fine." A few people chuckled nervously, and the nosy neighbor shot them a sharp look. "It's not just about the mailbox," she snapped, regaining some composure. "It's about setting a standard for everyone. If one person doesn't follow the rules, it sets a bad example for others." The wife raised an eyebrow. "Interesting perspective," she said slowly. "But here's the thing, rules are important, sure. But so is respect. And I don't think harassing someone for not joining a club they don't want to be part of counts as respectful behavior." Her words hung in the air, punctuated by murmurs of agreement from the crowd. Emboldened by the support, another neighbor spoke up. "She's right," he said. "Maybe we've been focusing too much on rules and not enough on being good neighbors." The nosy neighbor looked around the room, panic flickering in her eyes. This wasn't going according to plan. She had expected to dominate the conversation, to rally the group against the defiant newcomers. Instead, she found herself isolated. Her tactics exposed for what they truly were, bullying disguised as concern. Seizing the moment, the wife continued. "Look, I understand the desire to keep things nice around here. I really do. But let's be honest, this isn't about aesthetics or standards anymore. It's about control. And I'm not okay with that." Her voice softened, becoming almost conversational. If anyone has legitimate concerns about safety or property values, I'm happy to listen. But if this is just about forcing people to conform for the sake of it, then maybe it's time to rethink our priorities. By the time she finished speaking, the room was buzzing with quiet approval. Even those who had initially sided with the nosy neighbor seemed to have changed their minds. As for the nosy neighbor herself, she sat rigid in her chair, staring straight ahead as if willing the floor to swallow her whole. When the meeting adjourned, the couple walked out feeling lighter than they had in weeks. The husband grinned as they reached their car. "Well, that was fun. Think she'll leave us alone now?" The wife shrugged, a satisfied smile playing on her lips. "Probably not. But at least she knows where I stand and where everyone else stands too." Back at home, they settled onto the couch, enjoying the rare sense of peace. For the first time since moving in, it felt like they might actually belong in this neighborhood, not because they followed arbitrary rules, but because they stood up for themselves. And sometimes that was enough to earn respect, even in the unlikeliest of places. The fallout from the community meeting hit the nosy neighbor like a ton of bricks. For someone who thrived on being in control, seeing her authority crumble in front of an audience was nothing short of humiliating. The looks of disapproval from her fellow neighbors, the murmurs of agreement whenever the wife spoke, it all added up to a public defeat she wasn't prepared for. She tried to brush it off at first, telling herself that people would forget about it soon enough. But deep down, she knew the tide had turned against her. In the days that followed, the nosy neighbor became a ghost of her former self. She stopped patrolling the streets with her clipboard and avoided eye contact with anyone who passed by her house. Her usual smug demeanor vanished, replaced by a nervous energy that made her seem smaller somehow. Even her car, which had once been strategically parked in front of the couple's driveway, now stayed tucked away in her garage. It was as if she was waiting for the storm to pass, hoping everyone would move on and let her reclaim her position as the queen of the block. But the damage was done. Neighbors who had once feared or tolerated her antics began to distance themselves. Some even went out of their way to avoid her altogether. At the grocery store, she overheard snippets of conversations, people talking about how ridiculous the whole situation had been, how they admired the wife for standing up to her, and how refreshing it was to see someone prioritize kindness over control. Each word felt like a dagger, chipping away at the image she had worked so hard to maintain. For the couple, life settled into a new rhythm. Without the constant harassment, they were finally able to enjoy their home without looking over their shoulders. The husband noticed a change in his wife, too. The tension that had been building in her shoulders seemed to ease, and she started smiling more often. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, he turned to her and said, No, I think you might have just saved this neighborhood." She laughed, shaking her head. "I didn't save anything. I just called things out for what they were. People needed to hear it." "Maybe," he replied with a grin. Used. The nosy neighbor's retreat from the spotlight didn't last long. After weeks of lying low, she resurfaced with one final, desperate attempt to reclaim her power. But this time, instead of targeting just the couple, she decided to make it a neighborhood-wide spectacle. She organized yet another meeting, this time billed as a community celebration aimed at fostering unity and goodwill. The irony wasn't lost on anyone, least of all the couple, who received an invitation slipped under their door 3 days before the event. "What do you think?" the husband asked, holding up the colorful flyer. "Is this a peace offering? Or another setup?" His wife glanced at it briefly and smirked. Knowing her, probably both. Despite their suspicions, they agreed to attend. Ignoring the invite would only fuel more gossip, and besides, they were curious to see what kind of show the nosy neighbor had planned this time. On the day of the event, They arrived at the community center to find it decorated with balloons, streamers, and a table laden with homemade casseroles and desserts. For a moment, it almost felt like a genuine effort to bring people together, but then the nosy neighbor took the stage. Clutching a microphone in one hand and a stack of papers in the other, she launched into a speech that quickly revealed her true intentions. "Welcome, everyone," she began, her voice overly cheerful. "Today is about celebrating our wonderful neighborhood and the values that make it special. Hard work, dedication, and consistency." She paused dramatically, scanning the room until her eyes landed on the couple. "We're all here because we care deeply about where we live. And while some of us may have different ideas about how things should be done, I believe we can find common ground." Her tone shifted slightly, becoming sharper. After all, a strong community isn't built by exceptions. It's built by everyone pulling their weight. The room grew tense. Neighbors exchanged uncomfortable glances, unsure whether to applaud or cringe. The wife leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, wearing an expression that said, "Here we go again." Her husband nudged her gently, whispering, "You want me to grab some popcorn?" Before the nosy neighbor could continue, a man sitting near the front stood up. It was the same neighbor who had spoken out during the last meeting. "Actually," he said, addressing the crowd, "I think it's important to remember why we're really here. This neighborhood has always been great not because of rules, but because of the people in it. And lately, I've seen a lot of division over something as silly as a mailbox." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. Another neighbor chimed in, "Yeah, maybe it's time we focused less on enforcing standards and more on being good neighbors." The nosy neighbor's face turned red as she realized she was losing control of the narrative. She tried to steer the conversation back to her original point, but no one seemed interested anymore. By the end of the evening, the event had devolved into an impromptu block party with neighbors chatting, laughing, and sharing stories. The nosy neighbor lingered awkwardly near the dessert table before slipping out unnoticed. In the weeks that followed, life in the neighborhood returned to normal, but with a noticeable difference. People were friendlier, more willing to lend a hand or strike up a conversation. The rigid enforcement of HOA rules softened, replaced by a collective understanding that perfection wasn't the goal. Community was. Even the couple noticed a shift. Neighbors who had once avoided them now waved warmly or stopped to chat when they crossed paths. As for the nosy neighbor, her presence became increasingly scarce. She stopped attending HOA meetings altogether and spent most of her time indoors. Then, one day, a for sale sign appeared in her yard. Whether she decided to leave out of embarrassment or simply couldn't handle the changing dynamics of the neighborhood, no one knew or cared. When new owners moved in a few months later, they brought with them a fresh perspective and a willingness to embrace the quirks that made the neighborhood unique. Looking back, the couple often joked about how their first few months in the house had felt like living in a sitcom. Who knew moving here would come with its own drama series? The husband quipped one evening as they sat on the porch, sipping coffee. His wife chuckled, shaking her head. "Honestly, I wouldn't change a thing. If anything, it made us appreciate this place even more." And she was right. What started as a rocky beginning had turned into a lesson in resilience, patience, and standing up for what mattered. They had faced adversity head-on, not by stooping to someone else's level, but by staying true to themselves. In doing so, they earned not just respect, but genuine friendships. Life went on, quieter and sweeter than ever. Their mailbox still didn't match the others, but it didn't matter. To them, it was a reminder that sometimes the best way to fit in is to stand out, and that real community isn't about conformity, but connection.